Hey everyone, I'm Madonna Guy. This is David Shield. And in light of the election results, I want to talk about why
in
I
the
started
in the
getting
United
in the
States.
United States. Well, in Australia, I have never been involved in politics because nothing the government does suits my set of values.
Well, Bob Dylan said he said, "I don't expect the government or politicians to solve anyone's real problems."
Yeah, right. So because I've always been involved in natural health and I did my thesis on jibbity jabs 30 something years ago, I've been aware of all sorts of things for a long time. So I've been watching the United Nations for say 20 years, changing what them and the World Health Organization say is really healthy options for things, which generally I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what they do. So the interesting things about this particular election is the talking points that I was interested in, because I'm not American,
Mm.
but I know that there's a big flow on effect around the world if we can get the real data about what's really going on in health and start improving things. And this is why I was so invested and loved the talking points of, say, RFK Jr.,
Well,
because he's talking about getting the data, working out what works and what doesn't.
mm.
Did you listen to John Campbell this morning?
I listened to some of it, but I suppose my point I might be a bit different
Yeah, yeah,
from you on some things. Except the thing is that I liked Robert Kennedy
yeah.
and his wife is on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and so. I like that approach, and also a
He's
lot.
very data-based, knowledge-based,
But
fact-based.
not only that, my personal experience. I've had poisonings a couple of times in my
Yes,
life from both glyphosate and also methyl bromide, which they spray containers coming in because I work in
yes,
Indian importers. And so these toxins actually really are harmful to people.
yeah,
And not only they're harmful, but you just know from things like when the Vietnam War happened
yes,
and they sprayed everything with Agent Orange, and
yeah.
not only Agent Orange, but there were all sorts of chemicals that people got exposed to. And then finally, 20 years later, they give the veterans some sort of compensation for it.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's
it's
in the
awful.
USVA, but it's reflected here in a similar way.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And so a lot of it, and no matter where you find yourself these days. So my wife's a school teacher, and this stuff is becoming more and more. So people no longer operate as humans; they operate according to legal liability, not what's actually safe or unsafe.
Right, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
They're not doing what's safe and unsafe. They're doing what's required by legal liabilities, and these things keep increasing.
right.
You know, like for example, I heard maybe like a story the other day from a school was like somebody overlooked to make a complaint about something,
Yes,
and they got roasted over the coals. And I won't say what it is because it was confidential, but it wasn't that serious.
right.
And even like 10 or 15 years ago, nobody would have, you might have done something, but nowadays there's been so many recommendations,
Mm,
right, that start where you said. They
yes,
start with the UN and that sort of thing, and they
yeah.
make these blanket recommendations. Except the problem is when you're going to implement them, they're really strange and strict.
And
They don't
regularly they're non-human. They're
they,
they're
they
non-pro-human
don't allow for human error. And
or
it's
human beliefs or human understanding.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. So stuff from the UN comes down, and I know, and that's where it comes from because the recommendations are put in a particular way, in the way because in counselling you study the background of what those are and the way they're brought into society.
Yes,
And like at the COEG meeting in 2009, a whole bunch of recommendations came in about family,
right,
and they were like, and what they did was they put the mother's needs and the child needs together. There was no mention of any father.
right.
And so since 2009, and they updated them in maybe 2020, but basically, children have mothers and fathers, except because of the new UN thing that came in. It was when Putin came over, that COEG meeting. These
Yeah.
things got written into Australian legislation, and it left fathers out of the picture, and they
Yeah.
tied children to mothers, and they put mothers' needs and children. Except that's all well and good if
All of the studies show that
that's all
children are
well.
better off with both a mother and a father in the same home.
Um, so then you've got the studies, but the point is you end up with these UN recommendations coming in,
Yeah.
being signed into Australian law, but then the politicians get it and make it into something else.
Yes.
And then when the recommendations come down to the schools and sports associations
Yeah.
and wherever it comes in, it's or even more difficulty in the divorce court.
Yeah.
Because in the divorce court, well, you've got a UN legislation stating that basically dads don't exist in the picture.
Yeah.
That's how, and well, I did that interpretation at uni. I did, I did an assignment on it, and I was just surprised to see that it doesn't really reflect human life
Right.
or reality. It gives a definite advantage to one side of a couple.
Yeah.
Right, when two people are trying to bring up a kid.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of deadbeat people out there, deadbeat mums and dads.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of very controlling people. People have come from.
Well, that's what I'm loving about the whole concept of making sure that families are the cornerstone of society.
Well,
because there's a whole group of people that like when I was a kid, it was fairly unusual for a woman to choose business or a career. To choose
Right.
that over family. It was very uncommon. Now it's very common.
In the 70s, early 70s.
Yeah. So it was, whereas these days people are 10 years old and deciding they're never having children. How does that happen? How does a 10-year-old decide they're not
Well, the
having
thing
children?
about this, putting families first, well, I tell you what, the young generation's voting with their feet and not having kids.
Yeah, exactly.
But
that's because they're being told in school the stuff that the UN is pushing, that our earth is burning and that there's no future. We're being told rubbish again from the highest of politics, that things that just are not true. And I have kids in my clinic who are terrified of where the world's going. So I think if we can put it back to this, and this is what I'm loving about these discussions.
I was only using the way that got signed into the COEG
Yeah.
as an example of how things come through.
Yes, but if we look at the sensible things, like, for example, glyphosate, which is absolutely everywhere, everyone's breathing it in, even if you're eating organically, it's in the water supply, it's in the air we're breathing. It's in the air we're breathing. So if someone like RFK can...
Most of the wheat you eat's got a double dose.
Yeah, and like most of the food.
One for growing,
of the food.
One for drying.
And then it's gassed in the supermarkets before we ever get them. So there's so many layers to this toxicity. So if someone can actually look at it from a perspective of what's making us unhealthy, what's causing metabolic disease, what's causing this uptick in cancers, what's causing the obesity epidemic, and go, right, well, a lot of it is about toxicity. We don't lay down visceral fat because of diet. We lay down visceral fat because of stress and toxins. So when you start to look at that, you need someone at the top who's willing to say, we've got to outlaw some of these things. We've got to feed the kids healthy foods. We've got to look at the toxins in our environment and in our foods and start to change the laws around it. Dr. Stephanie Seneff has been researching glyphosate for 40 years. They just keep changing the damn name on it. And it binds, I don't know if you know this, but it allows the binding of aluminium to cross the blood-brain barrier.
It pulls all the minerals out of your system.
Pulls the minerals out of the system, as well as taking heavy metals to places where they should not be going.
Yeah, it's a brilliant chemical.
So anyway,
I think it was originally an antibiotic.
Yeah, it was, which is why every time we're having things, and that's just one chemical. That's just one chemical. There's thousands and thousands.
So, the people who are bringing awareness to this sort of thing are people online, and really, if you look at the American election, I'd say what happened from what I observed was that the normal news media weren't listened to.
No.
And really, the people who were doing...
which is a good thing.
Well, it's so good, bad for me just analysing it. It's like he got support from people who have an online presence rather than a television presence.
Right.
And that hasn't happened before. And I was looking at that and thinking that, like what I thought was interesting is because most people who are in the psychology area sort of say that Donald Trump is probably a narcissist. And that might well be true, right? I don't disagree with that. He's very grandiose and he's got most of the qualities and you could tag him pretty easily. Except the thing is, what he did that was really smart is that he surrounded himself in more compassionate people. So even though he might have his particular character, he surrounded himself in really good-hearted people. And I thought that was really interesting. So even though you mightn't vote for Trump, a lot of people would have voted for Robert Kennedy, and a lot of people might have been excited because Tulsi Gabbard was on his team.
Yeah.
Because she's a vegetarian, she'll go up Hare Krishna.
She had a beautiful song her and her hubby sang yesterday morning,
Oh, really? I didn't
you know,
see
as
that.
everyone was voting. Yeah, it was just really nice.
Right, but so I just watched that. I mean, I like it because I think a lot of the things that were happening in the things that they were voting against are similar to negative things happening in family systems.
Yeah.
Because I see family systems and social systems to be fairly similar.
Yeah.
The way that people will, give people the silent treatment or not talk to people or do all these really passive aggressive things.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, well, all you're doing is sort of wrecking your own life. And whatever was happening with these, ways of, oh,
Well, you know where I loved Obama. I really loved the idea of peace and unity and all of that sort of thing. I bought that hook, line, and sinker. And then he started to create laws that stopped funding for any research to do with whether or not genetically modified stuff was bad for us or not.
yeah, so,
It's sort of interesting. I've always only been involved in politics or interested in politics when it affected something that I knew that from a perspective of what's going on with my clients, I know these things are. And the other thing that he did was made it so that poop. Have you heard of poop transplants?
yeah,
Poo transplants. So here in Australia, if you get someone to give you some poop, you can go and have a poop transplant for, $400 or something. But in America, under Obama, they made it a law that poop was a drug. So therefore, it was under the whole big pharma banner. So therefore, it's like 15, 20 grand to have a poop transplant.
which is a transplantation of part of your bowel things,
Yes.
your internal, what do you call it?
Oh, sorry?
The internal thing, you take part of it and it increases your metabolic thing because you take on the life of the person you get the transplant from.
Yeah, and
like, because in the early days they did it, and I remember one example in one study where they took a pooch plant from someone who was maybe really fat.
Yeah.
And then the person put on all this weight.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one?
Oh, there's lots of examples. There's people who never had a McDonald's meal in their life and they did it for some totally different thing and all of a sudden they're craving McDonald's. So absolutely, there's billions of cells in those things. It's pretty unique.
But isn't that
some people get amazing results.
I know, but isn't that an amazing thing? If you did get one from someone with these problems, you end up with their problems.
Yeah.
That it kind of shows that problems don't have so much to do with free will, perhaps. The
microbiome
because
is
if you just
hugely
swap
important.
microbiomes with people, you take on parts of what look like their personality.
Yeah.
But it's not personality.
So anyway, I'm just excited at the moment. I just wanted to say because because I hope over the next few years they're looking at cleaning up the water supply, cleaning up the air supply, because we know there's all sorts of shenanigans up there. On day 2 RFK, I was talking to Dane Wigington, so I would highly recommend geoengineeringwatch.org to go see what's going on the planet, because he did a big interview during his campaign. And, so he said that he was going to stop that criminal act as well, because there's all sorts of things going on that causes death and ill health. That's a real challenge.
But that's public relations. And the thing is,
no, but someone has to make a stand publicly. No one's making a stand publicly.
I know that, and I was surprised to see him doing it too. And then when he became part of the Trump campaign, I thought that was really interesting because before, when he was doing independently, he mightn't have had very much influence. Now he's got a lot more chance.
Yeah.
Because those things need to influence. It's not like, I think people often think, oh, we'll just say this and that and it'll change.
No, there's a whole raft of things that have to happen.
When something's been going for, like public relations, for example, was kind of really invented in about 1918 when Edward Bernays came and invented it.
Right.
And he started working for the cigarette companies. But he's the guy who's behind all of the legal work that helps corporations legally protect themselves from doing these types of things.
Okay.
And the thing is that, like you said, you're dealing with very big organizations like the UN.
Yes.
Plus you're dealing with lobby groups from every corporation. And they're dealing with people always talk about the politicians.
Yes.
right, who are the elected people, but they're not the people who run. The people who run the government are all these people who've got jobs and they've just been there forever in the government.
Yeah.
And the politicians are often scared of those people because they're inside and they can mess them up. And so a lot of the stuff that's come out that people don't like in the last 15 years, I'd say, and especially 10 years, since 2015, everybody noticed there was a big change in a lot of things. And what's behind that is the public servants. They're the ones who really control everything, and the politicians kind of moderate them a bit. But if they want to do something, it's pretty hard to change
Yeah.
it. And the reason is, if that's not true, why is it that the public services have got the strongest unions? They already work for the government. Why do they need strong unions? It seems a bit odd to me. They've also got better benefits than everybody else.
Oh yeah.
And you
I
kind
that
of go,
really
and
annoys the
so,
hell out of me.
these people who are like, it's like they're a different type of class of people
Yeah,
in the
they all here
country.
in Australia they automatically get more holidays per year. They
And
get
I'm
a
not,
much
and I'm
higher
not, and I'm not, and I'm not
superannuation.
saying, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't get those things. It's just that I'm saying that they're the people. Like I remember watching, you see it in the US and here, when you get the senior public servants come in, and the Senate's asking them a question, and they're sitting there with a lawyer, a government lawyer, refusing to answer questions.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, where criminal when there's been like with that robo debt thing, people committing suicide, and they were sitting up there going, I'm not answering that.
Yeah.
And the people asking them going, but we've asked you 6 days in a row and you haven't sent us anything.
Well, here in Australia, in relation to the fizzer, the fizzer, and there was the board of people working for the airlines. So Graham Hood and all his mates, they actually asked for a FOIA request, and there was one page that was from our health minister, and the rest was redacted, 100% redacted. And the question was, why is this all redacted? And I said, well, it's because we have this agreement with Fizzer,
Yeah, and the only reason I bring that up is because these things go on all the time.
Yeah.
And even though you might get someone like Robert Kennedy, wanting to cause, shake it up a little bit, the things that are in power, not only they're in power, but they've been acting like that often
Yes.
for hundreds or decades.
No, but
Hundreds of years
I
or
think they've got a
decades.
really interesting opportunity at the moment.
Oh,
I do. I
I
think there's
suppose
an
so.
interesting
I
opportunity.
guess I'm a Franz Kafka person. What did he say? He goes, every revolution fades and leaves nothing but the slime of a new bureaucracy.
No,
And so I always, because I've watched politics for a long time, and I get a bit like, well,
I don't care. I'm excited at the moment. There's some good stuff being discussed,
no.
and therefore I'm excited.
And I think it's good too.
Yeah,
And
so I think some data will actually get looked at, some answers will actually get questioned, and I think that's really important. Rather than just that blanket safe and effective message out there for everything that,
well,
it's got to change.
Another thing that's good about it is that a lot of statements have been made publicly.
Yeah.
By Donald Trump, but also Robert Kennedy,
F. Kennedy Jr.,
but
yeah.
also other people too. And basically, what they've done by making public statements, a lot of people who were punished during the COVID era, right now feel some sort of validation.
Yeah,
because people were hurt, and they were hurt by public policy.
Yes.
That were made by both politicians and the public servants, and they ended up making a solution that actually hurt people.
Yeah.
And I know people who got really bad vaccine injuries in my own personal space, and it was a tragedy. And
I've had 2 deaths this week, but
yeah, I know. And when you got really close
30.
people and you think they're going to die and their body's going all numb after the vaccine, you kind of go, "Oh, that's really sad."
Yeah.
And the thing is that they've got so people got hurt, but there's no liability.
Yeah.
And then
well, that's one of the things they've said, to remove that the liability clause from 1984. So I think that is amazing for Big Pharma to actually have to stand up and say, yes, I've proven my product is safe and effective. They haven't had to with any jibbity jab since 1984.
Yeah, well, Robert Kennedy, he makes the case for all that and talks the whole history down so you can read it. And then, but even still, it's like once one of those things is in, it's really hard to change it, to reverse it, because you've got to get a lot of people, the majority of people agree in their safety.
Yes.
For the general ones.
But that's because the studies have never been done. And that's what RFK takes everyone
It's unlikely
through.
that vaccines will be stopped.
No, 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 but they
And
have to
so
prove their worth and their data and their efficacy.
plus also it's the amount.
No, 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 no.
No, the
Each
amount of
one, each individual one
yeah, yeah,
needs,
yeah.
and then they will look at
I
the
know, I know,
aluminium and the mercury and
I
all
know, but
sorts of things like that.
the point I'm making is if there were four things that might be safe,
Yeah.
but if there's 16 things, there's
Or
like a
72 or
yeah, there's
108.
eight times of risk of being safe or not.
Yeah.
And so it's the increase in the amount of them and also the type of them because
And
the
the
one,
type of heavy metals in the
well, but yeah,
base.
but the one that just damaged everyone, they're recommending we'll have more of those
Oh,
MRA
yeah.
things.
They're
And
still
so,
pushing it for
and
kids,
so
babies here in Australia.
you really have to wonder,
Yeah.
you know.
Anyway, so that's our little roundup on that. Hope everything does start going, forwards, upwards,
Well, at
and for
least a
the
lot of,
better of all health.
and a lot of people who were called conspiracy theorists, while because the US um, narratives run things.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people who are really harshly criticized for taking an alternative stance, being a conspiracy theorist, no longer have to wear that because at least in the US, the people running things are saying that's not true, these things are wrong.
Yes.
And all of the people who stood up against the party that lost, they were all pointing out those things, that these things are wrong and you're not a conspiracy theorist. It's actually um, there's been a lot of social damage happen.
Yeah.
And America led it, and it sort of carried its way across the,
Yeah. Because isn't it
democratic world.
interesting, when you hear RFK, talk about even people to do with AIDS and HIV. And, even going back then, everyone knew that if you didn't do something in the way that Fauci wanted, you wouldn't get funding.
What was
So
that?
he's been
What was that movie they
controlling
made
funding.
called
The Dallas Buyers Club,
Dallas Buyers Club? That was it. Gee,
Matthew McConaughey.
that's such a weird
Yeah,
movie.
so that's very much about what was, and it's exactly the same as this. Anything
Mm.
that was cheap and effective, they outlawed. Here in Queensland, Australia, they outlawed 28 medications that doctors routinely use
Mm.
for colds, flus, bugs, infections in March in 2020.
Really?
Yes.
You could still get them at the chemist.
No, 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 no. Doctors were not allowed. No, frick no, absolutely not.
Really?
So they are, yeah, like this is how early on the governments, were complicit in making sure that we had something go on around the world that created enough fear to create the need for the Jebediah jab.
Mm.
Absolutely. It was Peter McCullough who mentioned that late 2020 in an interview with Tucker Carlson. I listened, I thought, why was Queensland mentioned? He said, well, let's talk about Queensland, Australia. And I'm like, what? How the heck could she have known to outlaw all of those things that could have been effective and are now proven effective, in March 2020? Hadn't even hit Australia for another year then.
Mm.
Just nuts. But
Well,
something was going on. And once again, that's the whole
I won't
triple
admit it's a
effect.
pandemic yet.
Anyway.
No, very sad.
Oh,
Actually,
look, it's awful. It's
the problem
awful.
is with this stuff is that there's so much tragedy involved,
Oh, awful.
and not only
Absolutely.
tragedy, it's a fairly likelihood that whatever this thing was came out of a lab, so it's not even a natural product.
Yeah.
And so trying to fight it's really
Yeah.
hard too, because a lot of people I know who had vaccine, they went to the doctor, they went to the hospital under investigation, never any conclusion.
Yes.
And they've removed most of the people off YouTube with vaccine injuries. You
Yeah,
can't see them
absolutely.
anymore. But I saw people, they put all their blood tests up, nothing showing, and they've got all of these chronic symptoms.
Well, one of my clients, she was told when she actually got me to chat to her doctor when she was in, for one of her many, 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 many hospitalizations afterwards when they told her she was crazy and just had anxiety and psychosis. And so I gave her doctor a list of things that she should go check.
Mm.
Everything came back perfectly normal.
Mm.
And it was about 8 weeks later, I had to look at all the bloods and I'm like, oh my God, they lied. They lied. There was nothing normal about that blood work. There was nothing normal about her thyroid, her liver, her D-dimer was through the roof. There was loads of inflammation, and they said it's all anxiety. Go back to the psych unit.
Isn't that funny? Because a lot of that stuff, if you were going to look at it in as a family relationship, the victims of that, they're like given the silent treatment.
Yeah.
They're not told the truth.
Yeah.
It's like they feel like there's some conspiracy wrapped up around them. And they're fairly, because they're all passive aggressive things. They're not aggressive.
Yeah.
It's like if you give someone the silent treatment, and basically anybody who didn't take the vaccine kind of got the silent treatment.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's not only harmful
Yeah, well,
to
I've lost a
people,
couple of my best friends, it does
right?
suck.
But the problem with something like that is that it's not only the people who are copping the silent treatment who are suffering, the people doing it are suffering too.
Yeah.
Because, just like in a marriage, if someone's used silent treatment as a type of punishment, it hurts the person they're giving it, but what happens to that person doing it?
Yeah.
What'll happen to their hormones, their metabolic health? It'll plummet because suddenly, okay, they're not being affectionate to punish someone, so they're not getting oxytocin, they're not getting all these hormones they're not getting by punishing someone socially, and then they're like cranky all the time because that's what'll happen.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Their anxiety, their depression, those things all.
Yeah.
And I
Because
see a
you're
lot
not
of
allowed to speak your truth.
right,
Yeah.
and I see that a lot in the social equation that's been happening over the last several years, and not only that, silent treatment from the moderators of online. So not only were
Yeah,
you
being literally silenced.
so what
Yeah.
happens to the hormones of the people on both sides? All collapse.
Yeah.
And everybody suffers. And that's what we saw through the pandemic. People weren't able to get their dopamine up because they had all their goals taken.
Yeah.
They couldn't get their serotonin up
Yeah.
because they weren't allowed to do anything socially and get social credit.
Yes.
They couldn't get their oxytocin up because you weren't allowed to touch anyone. And so when you think about the effect of the lockdown on people's hormones, it makes them all plummet.
Yeah.
And then if everyone's hormones are plummeting, what do? They'll just bitch at each other.
Yeah.
Because they're not getting happy enough to be forgiving or anything like
Yeah.
that. They're constantly hormonally kept down.
Yeah.
Would you think?
Yeah.
Interesting, huh?
Oh, it's.
But it looks like it changes
been...
because a lot of the things people are upset with have been brought up in public and now they're out there and you're not a conspiracy theorist anymore. And now we can back to get good old fashioned conspiracy therapy.
Yeah.
So
and I know there's a lot of things that
got
really.
A problem, come in and talk to us, get counseling, we'll make you feel better.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thanks, David. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.